we're always told don't go photograph at 12 noon because you're going to get these harsh shadows and these hard lines. Today, I'm going to show you how you can recover your images whenever you run into these harsh shadows like you see on the image here on the screen. I do recommend you use a raw file for this type of recovery, just because we are going to make some extreme adjustments. You may be able to get away with this in a JPEG, but it's going to be a little bit more challenging, and you may experience some discoloration or some other type of artifact. The first step that I like to do is figure out my dynamic range that I have in the image. Now, again, I'm going to click on info real quick. You can see I'm working on a raw photo. Now, if I come back over to my levels, I can click on the clipping indicator, and as you can see, I have a few pixels that are clipped right there. So I know that in this area, in the base image, I've already lost information up there. Now I'm going to pull my exposure slider over to the left until I start to get these blue pixels or the blue mask show up, and this is going to tell me how far my range is for underexposing the image. And I think to about here is fine, because what I'm looking at is her hair is mostly black, and that's okay if I lose a little bit of information there, because I can locally bring this back with the local adjustment. As you can see, I'm at a -4 when it comes to my exposure on the shadow side. So now I'm going to make a mental note of that -4, and I'm going to reset this. Now I'm going to pull this up to the right, and I'm going to pull this pretty far because I'm not overly concerned about the background. This isn't anything that a vignette couldn't fix, but when I start to see the red, like I'm starting to lose some details in her hair clip there, and I'm also, it's coming down into this area, which, yes, small areas I'm not overly concerned with because I can use a local adjustment to fix those issues. However, when we get to the point where now this is probably where I would say I'm having exposure issues from the top to the bottom of my image, right? That's what I'm looking for. Exposure issues from the top to the bottom, which means my range is about 2.3. So I'm just going to make it an even number, and I'm going to say that I have 2 stops overexposed that I can play with, and that will give me a pretty decent look. All right. So now what I'm going to do is start to work on those issues, and the first thing that I want to do is remove contrast. So I'm just going to pull down on my contrast slider here. Now, I do recommend you do this in the develop module if you're using ON1. And just by pulling down on the contrast, I'm already recovering a lot of those shadow areas. I'll reset this real quick. You can see that it's just dark and it's burned over here. As soon as I start to pull down on the contrast, this image starts to flatten out and it gets a little bit more even, right? So once I'm done with my contrast, I can come over to my highlights and I can pull these things down pretty good. I know that I have some wiggle room. Again, this is going to vary by the image, so don't worry so much about the numbers. Just listen to the philosophy and the technique. And also, if you're using a raw image, this is going to work a lot better than if you are using a JPEG. I have my highlights, and all I'm trying to do is really look at how that's adjusting the image as a whole. I'm going to leave midtones alone for just a second. I'm going to come to shadows. What I like to do with my shadows is pull them down first and see where my shadows actually lie on the image, which obviously are darker areas. And then I like to pull them up just a bit. In these high contrast photos, when you pull down on the contrast, you're actually opening the shadows already. If you look at the histogram, as I pull this over to the right, then the image gets darker. As I pull this to the left, then the image gets a little bit brighter, and it's just bringing the darkest tone closer to the brightest tone. And that's opening the shadows essentially. I like contrast in my images, so I'm going to pull down on the black slider just a little bit. And again, I'm not worried about the hair because this is one area, right? I only concern myself with the clipping of the blacks when it's taking over a good portion of the image. This is where I would say I have a base edit with my tones. Now I'm going to turn off my clipping mask and I'm going to grab my midtones. I'm just going to pull those to the right until the photo, and the reason I'm pulling this to the right is because I want to brighten up some of those midtones because it's a portrait. I think portrait should be a little bit brighter, and I think that is probably about where I want it to be. And I'll turn on the clipping mask just to see what I got, and it didn't really affect anything too drastically. So if I hit the backslash key, this is the before and this is the after. Now, what you may also have an issue with in your image is the white balance. This is where a raw file really will come in handy, and I don't think I have too much of an issue with the white balance here, but I could cool down the photo just a little bit. I think that may even be too much. And now I can deal with my saturation and vibrance of the image. I can pull back on my saturation and pull up on my vibrance. And I'm only looking for a base edit here. I'm not looking for anything over the top. It doesn't have to be special because I am going to throw a preset on here in a second. Now that I have my edit the way that I want it to be, I'm going to go over to snapshots, and this is a feature of Photo Raw 2022.1, and I'm just going to go base edit because I want to try out a few presets on this image, and I'm going to leave it on snapshot. And the reason why I made all of my adjustments in the develop module is because when I add my presets, it's going to apply to my effects module. Now, this is my Free Will Photos portrait pack, which is for sale on my website now. If you go over to the website, you can purchase this pack. But all of these presets are, one, they're designed for portraits or photos with people in them, and two, they are also only in the effects module, and I'll show you that here in a second. So I'll probably go with this preset here, and then I'm going to just go hit the backslash key, see what's going on here, and I think everything is working out just fine. So if I come over to the effects module, you'll see that inside of the presets, some of these have information to tell you what to do. Like this is saying to mask it away from the eyes and hair. Really, this is telling me to mask it away from details. But if I turn this off, you can see all of my details come back. I turn this back on, then all I have to do is mask this away. Now, I like the edginess of this photo, so I'm going to leave that alone. But I do have a tone curve challenge because, let me go ahead and minimize this, because in her hair over here, in my daughter's hair, it just looks really odd. And that's because of this tone curve. Now, I know that because this is my preset. But if you are like, hey, I don't know how you even identified that. Typically, when you have an issue inside of darker areas, it's because there's something wrong with the tone. So all I have to do to adjust this is probably pull this down, and I can even use a mask to erase just a little bit. So my feather's at 55. I want to bring my opacity down. We'll go to about 30. And I'm just going to paint this away. Even though I already lowered the opacity, I'm just going to paint it away from these darker areas because I don't need it in these areas to be fully, like completely strong. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom out real quick. And as you can see, that's recovering a lot of this information and still retaining some of this, the look of adjusting the midtones, as well as there's a blend option, or I'm sorry, this is only applied to the shadows. So I have different things going on with these presets. So I can take complete control over opening my shadows with this curves adjustment as well. And that's probably something that I do need on this image. So I'll just play around with this until I'm content. And as you can see, we went from this as our original image to this as the final image, and it's a little bit darker than I would like it to be. So what I can do is just pull down the opacity of all of these adjustments to about there. Let's see how that looks. And I think that is much better. Hopefully that made sense when it comes to recovering harsh, contrasty photos inside of ON1 Photo Raw. If you found value in this video, smash the like button. If you want to see more photo edits, go ahead and click the video on the left. And if you want to see something that YouTube thinks is right for you, click the video on the right. Until the next time, I want you guys to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.